So the next one is that change requires discomfort. And I read this really beautiful Instagram post, and I forget who said it, so I'm so sorry I won't be able to credit the original creator. But they said something like, sometimes it will hurt more to heal than the initial pain. That like healing sometimes will hurt more than the initial pain. And that can be really confusing, because then we're like, wait, how much of this is that I'm recreating the same painful dynamics, right? And how much of this is actually healing? And that's why it can be really hard to know alone. It can be really hard to do this alone. But it is painful. Healing is pain. It's going to require discomfort. It's going to require us to confront certain parts of ourselves. And this is, again, going back to concept number one. There are very good reasons why we try to defend ourselves against our unconscious. There are so many good reasons. And now bringing more awareness, more of ourselves into our minds, of course, that's going to be uncomfortable. If we want to break relational dynamics that are self-defeating and are very painful, we may experience the difference as there being something wrong, because we're moving into something different. And we may feel like this is going against what I know, and therefore it is wrong. And it can then feel so disorienting. How do we know what's actually wrong? For example, having the emotional bravery to say to your partner, I'm angry with you, when we have been told our entire lives that we can't say that to somebody, and we do it, and then our partner gets angry back at us or whatever, right? Like responds in a way that's not super affirming. We may feel like that's wrong and we just did something wrong. And this is exactly why we don't do that in the first place. And so I want us to be really tender to ourselves, that oftentimes taking emotional risks feels really vulnerable, and we can very quickly want to push away the vulnerability by finding evidence to support why there's something wrong. But when we are in the process of healing, we are in the process of unearthing, we're in the process of opening ourselves up to more of ourselves, it may really feel like there is something wrong. But it's sometimes just a part of the process. It's just the messy middle of reorienting and reorganizing. A kind of metaphor that just came to mind is like, if we're reorganizing our kitchen and we move our cups to a different cupboard, it may feel really wrong for the first few weeks as we're getting used to the cups being in a new cupboard, and we go to the old one and we're like, well, no, they're not there. And it can feel really wrong, right? There can be something feel very off-putting and very disorienting about where the cups are now. But maybe the cups are now in a better place, ultimately, right? They're like closer to the dishwasher. It's like a better location for them. But it can still feel disorienting and wrong. But we know we can keep in mind that in the long term, this is ultimately better for us. And sometimes that can be so affirming to remember that in the long term, it's better to have more emotionally vulnerable conversations in our relationships. It's ultimately better for the relationship, even if it doesn't feel good right now. Taking the risk to be more open is always better, not necessarily because the relationship will be better, but because you will be better for it. And when you are better for it, all relationships become better. That may not mean that this particular relationship will become better. Maybe this relationship won't survive you being more emotionally honest. But ultimately, you are serving yourself because you are developing the capacity to tolerate these things in the types of relationships that maybe in the future you'll find yourself in that is just ultimately better for you. Yes? So sometimes it's going to hurt. And it's really a part of it. So back to Freud. He has this concept of working through, which refers to this kind of therapeutic process of repeatedly confronting and processing these unconscious conflicts, defenses, and emotional patterns until they can be understood and integrated and transformed. And so it's a really core tenet of this way of this kind of philosophy of thinking, which is that when we have experienced something really painful or we have a lot of conflicting aspects of ourselves, we're going to have to revisit it over and over and over again. And another way of thinking about healing is that sometimes it's like an upward spiral, right? We're going to revisit the same point over and over and over again, but from different perspectives, different experiences. We can relate to it differently because we're having these different emotional experiences as we're touching that painful thing. but we're going to have to touch that painful thing over and over and over again. I know, I really understand this fantasy that we're going to do it. We're going to do EMDR. We're going to address the trauma. We're going to move on. And then boom, bada, bim, bam, bam, right? Like everything's going to be good. We're going to do that work. We're going to go to that retreat. We're going to do this thing. And then we will be cured and we will move on and everything will be great. But that's just not how the mind works, particularly things that are relationally based or developmentally based. There are some things that are as simple as addressing it once and be done. But when it comes to these chronic ways of relating, especially something like the worthiness wound, it can be really, it sets us up to fail to believe that we just have to do it one and done. And the better way of orienting ourselves to healing work or the work of relating to ourselves is to remember that things have to be addressed over and over and over again for real change to take place, for something really permanent to get steeped in us. It requires us confronting and reorganizing and recalibrating and facing things several times. And, a key aspect of working through is that insight is not enough. Like insight alone, an intellectual understanding of the problem is not alone to create the change that we want. Because when we're talking about working through, we have to get connected to the emotional experience. We have to get connected to the unconscious and deeper processes that is keeping us stuck in these painful loops.